بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. ويكره للمصلي أن يعبث بثوبه أو بجسده ولا يقلب الحصى إلا أن لا يمكنه السجود عليه فيسويه مرة واحدة. So now we're going to talk about the things that one should not be doing while they are praying. So he starts by saying that it is disapproved for the Musalli that he or she fidgets and plays with their clothing or any part of their body. Right? Because Nabi alayhi salatu wassalam, he said, Inna Allah kariha lakum thalathu, that Allah has disliked for you three things. Al-abathu fi salat, wal-rafathu fi sawm, wal-zihf fi al-maqabir. Fidgeting and playing during salah, bad mouthing when fasting, and laughing at grave sites. So these are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes for the believer. Right? And then other hadith, the Prophet Islam saw a person while he was praying, he was playing with his beard. And he said, لو خشع قلبه لخشعت جوارحه. That if his heart was at ease, if his heart was concentrating on the prayer, then he would not be playing with his beard. And so these are things that a person should avoid while doing. Now, if a person plays with their body, right, uh, continuously in such a fashion that someone outside the salah may come to think of it that he's not praying, then this can actually invalidate the salah. The same goes for example, actions which are of use. For example, if it's really hot outside and you're actually sweating a lot, right? And so the sweat on your forehead is disturbing you, so you choose to wipe it off, for example. Or maybe you have an itch somewhere in your body and you want to scratch it, so it's really bothering you, and you do so. So the fuqaha have said that if you do it 3 times consecutively, it's going to invalidate your salah, because it usually gives the impression that you're not in the salah, right? So if you're feeling itchy, or if you want to wipe out that sweat, right, then do it once, or pause between each time enough, maybe around 10-15 seconds or so as to not continuously do it to give the impression of you not being in the salah. What we call in the istilah of the fuqaha as al-amalul kathir, excessive action, which is not part of the salah, because that is one of the nullifiers. And the same goes for playing with a person's clothes, right? One more thing that you shouldn't do is if you're praying outside on the ground and there are pebbles, right? And it's possible for you to perform the sajda with the pebbles there, then you should not wipe them from your place of sajda. Not be wiping them from your place of sajda. Try to do that. But if they're like really sharp and it's impossible, next to impossible to actually make sujood on it, then you can wipe them only once. And so the Prophet Islam, he told Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu, Marratan ya Abu Dharr wa illa fadar, that Abu Dharr, that if you really require that you wipe the pebbles and you wipe the rocks away, then do it just once. So basically, you have to minimize every action which is not part of the salah as much as you can. Sometimes you can't avoid it, so that's an excuse, that's an exception, but your salah should have concentration, and your actions and words should be limited to what has been transferred to us through the sunnah and through the actions of the Sahaba Rasulullah. So if you need to move the pebbles away, then do it once. What are other things that a person should not do? ولا يفرق أصابعه ولا يشبك ولا يتخصر ولا يسدل ثوبه ولا يكفه ولا يعكس شعره ولا يلتفت يمينا وشمالا ولا يطيع إيقاع القلب ولا يرد السلام بلسانه ولا بيده ولا يتربع إلا من عذر ولا يأكل ولا يشرب. He's mentioned quite a few things. Like he mentions 11 things that a person should not do because they're makruh to do so when you are in the salah. First thing is furqa'atul asabi, which is to crack your fingers, like popping those nitrogen bubbles that form in your fingers during salah. Second thing, not doing tashbih, which is interlace. I mean, putting both your fingers through one another. Third is the hustle, to place your hands on your flanks, on your hips during salah, right? And so all of these things, they're mentioned within the hadith as well. For example, the Prophet ﷺ, he told Ali radiallahu anhu, إِنِّي أُحِبُّ لَكَ مَا أُحِبُّ لِنَفْسِي. I like and love for you what I like and love for myself. لا تفرق أصابعك وأنت تصلي. And what is the thing that the Prophet ﷺ loved for himself? Was not to crack his fingers when he was praying, right? And placing your hands on your hips is during salah is actually makruh tahrim, because that's how the Yahud and the Jews used to pray. And so the Prophet Islam, he mentioned al-ikhtisar fi salat rahatu ahli placing your hands on your hips, on your sides, and that's the relaxation of the people of the hellfire, right? And so it's makruh tahrim to do so, because that's tashbih bi ahlina. Outside of salah, it's not a problem. Inside of salah, that's where the issue lies. Number 4 is to do sadal. So sadal, what it usually meant at the time of the Prophet Islam, was to place uh, a sheet over a person's body with all of its sides falling towards the ground, right? So like if you've ever observed, uh, if you had the chance to go to Umrah, maybe you've observed the Aimma in the masajid, like they have that headscarf kind of thing, and all of it hangs down towards the earth, right? So that was sadal, which the Prophet Islam uh, disallowed, disapproved of a person doing it. And this was something that the Yahud used to do, and they still do today. So they place a sheet on their shoulders or on their head and let it fall down. So that is sadal in its original sense, which the Prophet Islam disapproved of. But in a more larger context, sadal refers to wearing any piece of clothing other than its mentioned or other than its approved urf and norm, right? So for example, if you cover your head with a skirt, that is something that people don't normally do. Neither was the skirt built for that purpose. So that would be included in sadr, for example, right? Another example of sadr is, for example, putting your jacket on without actually inserting your hands in the sleeves. So that's not how a jacket is supposed to be used, right? Or a sweater. So you just don't place them on your shoulders without having your hands enter the arm pockets. Or for example, some people, tie it to their waist. So that's not a purposeful use of sweaters and jackets. So wearing them in this fashion would be part of sadl. So basically everything which was not made for a certain purpose or is urfan, traditionally, customly not used for a specific way, using it against that would be sadl. And so that's something that a person should avoid, not only inside salah, but outside as well. Inside salah, it's makruh. Outside, although not makruh in the same sense, but still, it's not something that a person should be doing. وَلَا يَكُفُّهُ. And the fifth thing is gathering up your clothes using your hands. So some people have this habit is whenever they go to the sajda, they lift up the back of their, especially if you're wearing a long shirt, a kameez, for example, what they do is they lift the back of it so it doesn't fall to the ground or it doesn't get stuck between their feet, something like that. Right? So this is something that a person should also not be doing. Other times you might see them collecting their clothes. Maybe it's dropping, so they're collecting it in their hands before they make the ruku or before they go into sujood. Especially if you're wearing a shawl, for example. In the winters, that happens a lot over there. You start gathering all of it over because it's falling off you all the time. So this gathering of your clothes, whether going to the sujood or getting up from it, this should also be avoided because again, all of these are actions which are outside the salah itself. وَلَا يَعْقِسُ شَعْرَهُ. And braiding his hair. So for men, braiding their hair, making them into buns, that is makruh. For women, it's allowed. It's for them, it's not makruh. And so the Prophet Islam, he forbade men to pray ma'kusu sha'r when their hair was tied in buns on their heads. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he saw a person praying in such a manner. While he was praying, he pulled his hair buns until they opened up. And he said that whenever one of you has long hair, then he should let their hair also make the sujood with them. So for men it's disallowed, but for women it's allowed. Seventh thing is al-iltifat, to turn towards the right or left. Now, if your eyes move towards the left or right, that's okay. That's not a problem. The Prophet Islam too. Sometimes his eyes would go to the right and left. That's not an issue. The thing that's makruh is to actually turn your head. So turning your head towards the right or left, it does not invalidate your salah, but it is makruh tahriman. But if your chest moves away from the qibla, that invalidates your salah. So as long as your chest is pointing towards the qibla and you just move your neck, that will not invalidate your salah, but that's still makruh. And the eighth thing is al-iqa. Iqa is squatting like a dog squats. So what you do is you put your feet in front of you with your knees pointing upwards, and you place your hands on the ground towards behind you, right? Usually, if you're sitting down and you want to relax, stretch, sometimes you do that with both your feet on the ground. You place your hands towards the back and stretch your body. Right? So that's how. If you ever seen a dog sit, right? Their feet are towards they put their hands with their feet between them and they sit in that position. So that's what's iqal qalb, which the Prophet Islam forbade one from sitting in that manner. Ninth thing is to reply to someone's salam either by tongue, that's going to invalidate the salah, or by gesturing with the hand, although that won't invalidate the salah. But it is makruh to do so. وَلَا يَتَرَبَّعْ إِلَّا مِنْ عُذْرٍ. And not sit cross-legged during salah unless there's an excuse. If you can't sit in normal tahiyya position, and then sitting cross-legged is okay, but normally if you can, then you should not be sitting cross-legged, right? Uh, and not to eat or drink when you are praying because this goes against the salah and it's going to invalidate it. So you see, some of these things they invalidate the salah if you do. Others they're just disapproved. Some to the daraja of being tahrim, and some may be just a tanzih, right? And so Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu, he mentions that the Prophet Islam forbade me in three things. An anqurak and nakritik is to peck like a chicken, a hen, when I'm praying. This refers to actually praying extremely fast without relaxing and completing each component of the salah peacefully. So you perform the first sajda, you get up, and before relaxing, you will go back to the second sajda, like instantly. So just like a hen, when it picking the seeds from the ground, right? Performing sajda like that, that's something that the Prophet ﷺ forbade Abu Dhar, and through him, us as well. Second thing was he forbade iqa'ul qalb, sitting like a dog, which we explained. And the other thing is that he said iftirashul ta'lab, to place your entire arm. This is for the men, not for the women. This last part is to place your entire arm on the ground when you're performing sajda. As far as tarabbu, sitting cross-legged, is concerned, so sometimes the Prophet Islam would do, he would even eat in that position. But as far as within the salah it's concerned, he didn't used to do that unless there was some udur. And as far as eating and drinking is concerned, that invalidates the salah. But what if something is stuck between your teeth? You weren't able to get it out when you start your prayer. How much is it? How much amount is exempted? And so, if all of the particles inside your mouth, if they're the size of a pea, right? If they're less than that, then that's okay. That would invalidate the salah. But if all of it reaches the size of a pea, then that is excessive amount, and that's to invalidate your salah. If you find particles coming to your mouth, you can't swallow them. Push them towards. We want to minimize action, so taking them out of your mouth during the salah is also not something to do. So what you could do is push them onto your lips, right? So that they don't go in, and you don't have to use excessive action of your hands during salah as well. And so after you're done, you can remove them. And similarly, if you have minor gum bleeding during your salah, and what we mean by minor is that it does not change the color of your saliva. And so even if you swallow it, that's not going to invalidate your salah. But if it's excessive, then obviously because your wudu is going to break, your salah will also become invalid. So these were things that the Prophet Islam has told us not to do when we are praying. This next masala is known as masalatul bina. And it's what happens is that actually sorry, this next masala is not masalatul bina, it's masalatul istikhlaf. Basically, if the imam, when leading the prayer, he accidentally, his wuzu breaks, right, because of a minor impurity, what should he do then? So what he does is, in sabaqahu al-hadas, in sarafa wa tawazza wa bana ala salatihi, in lam yakun imam. Uh, if the person is not an imam, so if they are overcome by a minor ritual impurity, they should just turn away from their salah, perform wuzu, and then reestablish their prayer from where they left off. Whatever part they missed, they will make up for it afterwards. But for the remaining part, they just continue with the same Jama. There's no need to restart the whole thing. Things to remember at this moment is when you're overcome by a minor impurity and you're going to make the wuzu, try your level best, if possible, not to turn your chest away from the Qibla. If it's not possible, then it's okay if you do so at the moment. Other thing to remember is that you have to go to the nearest place where you can perform wuzu. If you exceed the nearest possible place, your salah will become invalid and you have to do it all over again. You can't do the bina. You can't continue on your previous tahrima. You have to do a new prayer, right? Third thing is that during this whole time, you can't talk to anyone. If you talk to anyone, you say one single word, then you have to restart your prayer. You can't build on the one that you already started. Because this time between you leaving the prayer to make wuzu, it's as if you're still in prayer. So all of the things that you can do inside of the prayer, you can't do at this moment in time either, except for the necessary walking towards and the excessive action of making the wuzu and coming back. That's something you just have to do. It's unavoidable. But other than that, all other things which you cannot do inside of salah, you cannot do in this time between you making the new wuzu and rejoining the prayer that you previously started. So what you do is, if you're not the imam, you turn away, perform wuzu, reestablish the prayer from where you left off. And if you're the imam, you do one extra thing. What is that? فَإِنْ كَانَ إِمَامٍ اسْتَخْلَفَ وَتَوَضَّأَ وَبَنَى عَلَى صَلَاتِهِ مَا لَمْ يَتَكَلَّمْ. That he's going to make a khalifa of him. He's going to make a substitute. So he's going to pull a person from behind, place him in his place to continue leading the prayer from where he left off. He's going to go perform wuzu and then rejoin the prayer, not as the imam this time, but as a normal muqtadi. So he relinquished his imama to a second person. And for this masala and others like it, the Prophet ﷺ, he gave this instruction to the Sahaba, لِيَلِي مِنْكُمْ أُولُو الْأَحْلَامِ وَالنُّهَى, that during prayer, the people behind me should be from the Ahlul Ilm and those with aql. Because if an event like this happens, if you're not aware of the masala of istikhlaf, the masala of the substitute, right, then you might pull someone forward and he might not know what's happening, right? And he might do something that's going to destroy everyone's prayer. So in order to avoid such situations, the Prophet Islam instructed us that the people standing behind the Imam should be aware of these masail and should be quick enough to understand the situation that's happening. Like if the Imam's pulling you forward, you should be able to understand exactly what happened, that he was forced to do something. Right? So you need intelligent, knowledgeable people behind you for such issues. One thing the Imam, when making this istikhlaf, should be aware of is that the person should not be incomplete. If he does not know the Quran, he can recite it, then he's going to invalidate everybody's prayer. So the Imam should make someone a Khalifa who is aware of these masail, who knows the Quran enough to be able to lead the prayer. He's not going to tell what happened, he just pulls him forward. It's up to the Khalifa to be substitute to know who exactly what is happening. So anyhow, this is the new Imam. The old one goes and joins as a Muqtadi, right? And all of this can only happen as long as they don't talk. Wal istinafu afwan, but it's best to restart the prayer. End the first one and restart everything all over again. Because it's the safer option, right? Not necessary, but the safer option. So let's take a case example to put in what's exactly happening. So let's say I'm leading the prayer, and it's Asr prayer. We've already done 2 units. We're in the third one, and third one, uh, I scratched myself and I started bleeding. Right. So I start bleeding. My wuzu no longer exists. So what I do is I'm just going to pull the person behind me to the front. We're in the qiyam at this moment. He's going to continue, and I'm going to go towards the wuzu area to perform the wuzu. And then let's say at the time I come back from the wuzu area, he's in the sujood. He's in the second sajda, which means that I've missed the third unit, right? So I'm going to continue as a muqtadi, the fourth unit. And when the imam says the salam, I'm not going to say salam because why? I've already missed a unit. So when he's completed with the salam, I'm going to stand up and make that missed rak'ah, that missed unit of prayer, because that was something that was left behind when I went to do the wuzu. I was not part of it during the salah, right? So that's what's happening here. You're missing that part of the salah in which you're making the wuzu, which you have to make up after you're done. Uh, if I were praying alone, it would have been a better option to do the istinaf, to redo my prayers. But for the fear of missing a jama'ah, if I choose to use masalatul bina, it's permissible. And the truth about this masala is that although we learn this masala, but rarely anyone ever actually does it. It just somehow feels a bit weird. Same goes, for example, a lot of people face this issue when doing mas'al al-khuffayn, when wiping over the leather socks. It's not just for emergency, you can do it normally too. But somehow it just, for a lot of people, feels weird. As if they can't digest the fact that you're allowed not to wash your feet. Or to digest the fact that you're allowed to actually uh, go and build on a prayer that you had to go because of an impurity in between. So sometimes it's not necessary that you do so, but in order to make yourself used to these things, we must force ourselves to actually make amal on these masail as well, so they don't become really strange to us when we see someone else doing it. Now here's when we talk about those things that nullify the wuzu, and then so would nullify the salah as well. وإن نام فاحتلم أو جن أو أغمي عليه أو قهقه استأنف الوضوء والصلاة. If during the prayers someone falls asleep so deep that they experience a seminal discharge, or if they lose their sanity, or if they become unconscious, or if they laugh audibly, then their wuzu and salah both need to be renewed, right? Because all of these things, if you remember, whether it's sleeping and then experiencing seminal discharge, whether it's becoming insane, losing your consciousness, or laughing out loud during salah, all of these things were discussed in the nullifiers of wuzu, and so they will be nullifiers. And with no wuzu, there's no salah. The above case, your wuzu did become nullified, but your salah was still intact. This is not the case over here because that was more or less something that happened. Sabaqah fil hadath. Like someone deliberately breaks their wuzu, they can't do the previous masala. They can't do the masalatul bina. They're going to have to restart their salah. That is if they're overwhelmed by it. As far as the ihtilam is concerned, seminal discharge, that's not a minor impurity. That's actually a major impurity. So that's out of the question. Insanity and being unconscious. So although they're not major impurities, but the fact is you become completely disconnected with the salah. That's why you have to redo the salah. And qahqaha, though although it's khilaful qiyas, logic doesn't seem to support the fact that your wuzu should break and you should repeat your salah. But for the simple reason that it's mentioned in a hadith that the Prophet was leading the prayer, Sahaba behind him. A blind man, he was coming. He accidentally, unable to see, he fell into the well. And so some of the Sahaba, overwhelmed by this, they just laughed. And so after the prayers, the Prophet Islam instructed to those who laugh to repeat their wuzu and their prayer. Although doesn't seem to be any sort of impurity or anything, but because the hadith is present, we will keep our logical assumptions aside. Because our deen is not built on logic, our deen is built on tradition. It's built on naql. So qahqaha, laughing audibly, is concerned, it's proven by the hadith, although there is no sort of actual impurity involved. Now talking about things that don't nullify your wudu, but they do nullify your salah. وإن تكلم في صلاته ساهيا أو عامدا بطلت صلاته. If someone talks in their prayer deliberately or out of forgetfulness, their prayer will become void. So initially, talking during the salah was allowed, and then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran said, وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ, that stand in front of Allah in silence and reverence, talking became forbidden. And so Sahabi Muawiyah ibn al-Hakam as-Sulami radiallahu anhu, at the time of the verse, he was not in Medina, he was an Amir of the Sunnah. And so when he came to pray, he joined the salah and then asked the one beside him how many units have been performed, right? He didn't reply to Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. He asked him again, how many are done, right? So he saw that the other person didn't say anything, but he was actually staring at him, had the angry face on, and was staring directly, glaring at Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, right? Not just him, the other side. So, and seeing their faces, he became quite worried and started asking, like, why are you treating me this way, right? In order to silence him down, they started tapping on their thighs, telling him to keep quiet, right? So I understood what was happening, so he shut up at the moment. After the salah was complete, uh, he came to the Prophet Islam, and the Prophet Islam told him that إن صلاتنا هذه لا يصلح فيها شيء من كلام الناس إنما هي التكبير والتسبيح والقراءة. That our salah is something that people's talk, the kalam that people normally do, is something that's not befitting of the salah. The salah involves takbir, tasbih, and qira'ah, and that's what the salah should be specified for, right? So the instructions made it clear to him afterwards that now talking has become forbidden. So now if someone talks, whether forgetting or deliberately, their salah becomes invalid. وإن سبقه الحدث بعدما قعد قدر التشهد And if someone is overcome by a minor impurity, after they have sat period to the tashahhud, the time it takes to say the tashahhud. If you sit in that much and then you are overwhelmed, tawazza wa sallam. So you just basically go, make the wuzu, come back and say the salam. If you're in the jama'ah and you've sat that amount, it doesn't matter if the imam's already finished the prayer. You just go, make wuzu, sit on your place, and then just say the salam. The same rules apply that you can't talk to anyone in between this. You have to go to the nearest place possible to make the wuzu. And number three, that you should not move your chest away from the qibla as much as possible. وإن تعمد الحدث في هذه الحالة, if someone's already uh, has already been seated for the time of amount it takes to say the tashahhud, and then they didn't become overwhelmed by the minor impurity, they deliberately acquire a minor impurity. أو تكلم, or they speak after sitting that amount. أو عمل أو عمل عملا ينافي الصلاة, or do something against the nature of the prayer. Maybe they start shaking people's hands, or maybe they start checking their phone, for example. تمت صلاته. The salah is complete, is valid, but they're going to have to do the i'adah. So there are two ways or two reasons why a person redoes their salah. Sometimes they redo it because their salah is invalid. It's like they've never actually prayed at all, so they have to redo their salah. Sometimes you redo their salah not because your prayer is invalid, it is valid, but because of damages done in your salah. In order to rectify them, you redo the salah. So for example, in this last moment, when they don't say the salam to end their prayer, right? And they end their prayer actually by doing something entirely different. Their prayer is incomplete, which means they've completed their farz and they ticked that box off from their to-do list. They won't be held accountable in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for not praying. Their prayer is done. But because it's a wajib to end the prayer by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and they did not complete this wajib, they completed the prayer by speaking or doing something else. And so, in order to rectify this mistake, in order to make up for this damaged salah of not completing the wajib, you redo the prayer. And actually, this happens in every wajib. Like we say, if you miss out a wajib, you do the sahab. The sahab is a substitute. But if a person doesn't do the sajda sahab, it does not invalidate their prayer. But the hukum for the i'adah, the hukum to redo it, is to make up for the loss and to rectify the mistake, not because the farz of salah has not been met. That's another point of confusion a lot of people have, is they think if you missed out a wajib and you didn't do the sahab, your prayer was invalid or is as if you did not pray. No, that's not true. Your farz is completed, but you're only making up for the mistake that you've done. You only redo the prayer, or in other words, your prayer is left incomplete or invalid if you don't do any of the farz. If all your farz are complete, you don't do the wajib, or you miss a wajib, your farz is complete. So which basically means is, for example, if a person prayed leaving out a wajib, for example, and after the salah, maybe they passed away. There's no need to give fidya on behalf of that salah. Number one. Number two, for example, you were really short on time, right? And as soon as you completed your prayer, the time for that specific salah, take asr for example, it finished and maghrib started. There's no need to repeat the asr because your farz was already complete. So these some are some of the things that people might be unaware of, and it's good to know. Now next, the Musannif rahimahullah ta'ala, he talks about 12 masail. So these are known as uh, al-masail al-ithna ashariya, the 12 masala, the 12 problems and issues in which there's a difference in opinion between Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala and the Sahibain, his two most famous students, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad rahimahullah ta'ala. So in these 12 masail, the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala holds one opinion while the Sahibain hold another opinion. So what are these 12 masail? وَإِنْ رَآهُ say before these 12 masail, there's one other masala. إِنْ رَأَى الْمُتَيَمِّمْ الْمَاءَ فِي صَلَاتِهِ بَطَلَتْ صَلَاتُهُ. If someone actually sees water, observes that there's a body of water which they can access during their salah, and beforehand they actually started praying in the state of tayammum. Maybe they didn't find water, so they did tayammum and started their prayers. But during their prayer, they notice and they see that there's a body of water and there's nothing that's actually stopping them from using it. Their tayammum becomes valid, and when their tayammum becomes valid, it means they revert back to a state of impurity. And when they revert back to a state of impurity, the prayer will become invalid. So a mutayammim, as someone performed tayammum, if they see water during their salah, and not just seeing, being able to access it as well, their prayer will become invalid. Now let's talk about the Masail Isna Sharia, the 12 Masail in which Imam Hanifa is on one side and his Sahibain are on the other side. Right? Now for Imam Abu Hanifa, remember the asl here, the principle that's involved here, al-khuruj bi sun'ihi farzun inda Abi Hanifa. What Imam Abu Hanifa says is that your own intentional action is necessary, is a farz, in order to exit the salah as well. If you look at the examples that we just studied, if a person deliberately acquires a minor impurity, or if they deliberately talk or do something against the nature of the prayer, what did we say? We said that their salah is complete, although they redo it to rectify mistakes and damages, but their salah is complete because all of these actions, whether deliberately acquiring an impurity, talking, eating, doing something else, were deliberate intentional actions. So they basically, that musalli exited the prayer with an intentional action contrary to prayer itself. And so that intentional action to end your prayer is a farz according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, which is not a farz according to the Sahibain. The Sahibain say that exiting the prayer deliberately is not a farz. And so if you have completed all your farz components, that is up till the tashahhud in the last qa'da, in the last sitting. If you've done that and you're unable to deliberately finish your own prayer, something just happens, your prayer is still complete according to them. So in these 12 masail that we're going to discuss right now, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, the prayer is invalid. Why? Because one farz is not met. That is to end the prayer with an intentional and deliberate action. But according to the Sahibain, since all the farz actions have been completed, in these 12 issues and cases, the person's prayer will be complete and will not be invalid. So hopefully what's going on, the whole overview is clear. Now let's look at those 12 aside. Number one, وَإِنْ رَأَى الْمَاءَ بَعْدَمَا قَعَدَ قَدْرَ التَّشَهُّدِ. This is connected to the previous masala. We said that if the one who performed tayammum, if he sees water, his salah becomes batil, right? But there's one case in which there's ikhtilaf. That is, if he sees this water after he has sat for the period equal to the tashahhud in the last unit, right? That's case number one. Masala number two, كان ماسحا فانقضت مدة مسحه. That if someone was wiping over their hoofs and the time period elapses, for the resident 24 hours were up and that person was during in his prayer, or for the traveler 72 hours were up and they were in their prayer. That's masala number two. Masala number three is that they actually remove one of their hoofs, the leather socks. بِعَمَلْ قَلِيلٍ. With little action, a sock was removed. Remember that we discussed if the sock is removed, your mas'al al-khuffayn becomes void and you have to wash your feet. So if the sock is removed, this must becomes void, which means that the hadas comes back to the feet and now he's on an incomplete wudu. Number four is a person was illiterate, they didn't know how to recite, but during their salah, for example, maybe by God's will or some other reason, they learned enough verses of the Quran to be able to actually recite and perform their salah. Or number five, أو عريانا فوجد ثوبا. When starting their salah, they were naked, they didn't find any garments, but during their salah, now they have enough garment to cover their salah. That's masala number five. Number six, أو مؤمئا فقدر على الركوع والسجود. Number six is a person who initially started praying with gestures because they were unable to perform the ruku and sujood, but now during their salah they gained that ability to actually make ruku and sujood. Right. Masala number seven, أو تذكر أن عليه صلاة قبل هذه. They remember that there's a prayer due on them prior to the one they're praying right now, with the condition that they don't have any other qaza prayers or less than 5 qaza prayers in their dhimma, it's not in their responsibility. If it reaches 5, then this masala does not apply. This masala number 7. But if they have less than 5 qaza prayers, then this masala applies that if you have missed a salah previous to the one you're praying right now, you cannot initiate this one until you have completed the previous one. So you start the Asr prayer at the moment, for example, then you realize you didn't pray Zuhr. That's masala number 7. Masala number 8. أو أحدث الإمام القارئ فاستخلف أمين. That a literate imam, he did the istikhlaf of an ummi imam, an illiterate imam who does not even know how to recite. Masala number 9, أو طلعت الشمس. That the sun rose during the Fajr prayer. Masala number 11, أو دخل وقت العصر في الجمعة. That Asr time enters the Jumu'ah prayer. So only on the day of Jumu'ah, when you're praying the Jumu'ah prayer, you can only pray Jumu'ah in the time of Dhuhr. After Dhuhr, it's impossible. That's why there's no qaza of Jumu'ah either. You do the qaza of Zuhr if you miss Jumu'ah. So if you make the Jumu'ah so late that during your Jumu'ah, when you sat Qadr al-Tashahhud, what happens is that the Asr time starts. That's masala number 10. أو كان ماسحا على الجبيرة فسقطت عن برء. 11 is that someone was wiping over a splint, over a bandage, a cast, right? Anything. And then during the salah, that bandage actually falls off, and you realize that the wound beneath it actually has already healed. So if you had the bandage on, you were doing masa on it, you weren't washing it, right? For the fact you're protecting the wound from becoming more damaged. But if it falls off and you realize that it's already healed, that part was necessary to wash. أو كانت مستحاضة فبرئت. Oh, that woman, she was suffering from chronic menstrual bleeding. What happens is that she's cured now. She becomes all right. She becomes healthy again at the time. So in these 12 masail, if any of these things happen after a person has already sat the amount it takes to say the tashahhud in the last unit, what's going to happen is their prayer is invalid according to Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. Why? Because these people did not exit their prayer on their own accord. All this happened unintentionally, without any deliberation from their part, which is a faras according to Abu Hanifa, which was not met, and so that's why the prayer is invalid. But according to the Sahibain رضي anhum, tammat salatu fi hadhihi masail. These 12 masail, the prayer of this person is valid.